Courtrooms are a lot like operating theaters. Cold, sterile, and while there's no actual blood, lives are dissected on the table. When renowned heart surgeon Brandon Pierce discarded his wife, labeling her unskilled and worthless, he thought he had performed the perfect excision. But tucked away in Grace's bag was a single piece of paper, signed years ago and long forgotten. The moment that document hit the table, the hunter became the hunted, and the worthless wife became the one calling the shots. This is the story of a woman who refused to accept her appraisal value and came to collect exactly what she was owed, down to the last penny. Let's get into the story. Courtrooms are a lot like operating theaters. They are cold, sterile, and while someone's life is being dissected on the table, everyone maintains a deadly, professional silence. The only difference is, in here, there's no blood. Just bank accounts and memories bleeding out on the floor. I sat across from Judge Henderson. She was a woman in her 50s with eyes like flint and gray hair pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun. At the other table sat my husband, my ex-husband, Dr. Brandon Pierce. He was wearing the charcoal Italian wool suit I had ironed for him 100 times. The suit I paid for. Next to him was Marcus Thorne, his lawyer, a man whose smile looked like a jagged scar. And behind them, in the gallery, sat Veronica Ashford, the pharmaceutical rep, Brandon's new status symbol. Perfect skin, perfect manicure, an expression that hovered somewhere between anxiety and premature victory. Thorne stood up, buttoning his jacket. He cleared his throat, preparing to vomit the words that would define my existence for the public record. "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice dripping with faux respect. "My client, Dr. Pierce, has built an impressive career through his own sheer grit and dedication. He graduated top of his class from medical school and is now a respected cardiothoracic surgeon at Metropolitan Elite Hospital." He paused, pivoting to look at me with the kind of pity one reserves for roadkill. "During the marriage, Mrs. Morrison, he used my maiden name, stripping me of the Pierce identity, worked various low-skilled jobs. Cashier, waiters, cleaning lady. Her contribution to the household was minimal while my client pursued his demanding education. A familiar, cold knot tightened in my stomach. Low-skilled, minimal contribution. I looked down at my hands, clasped tightly in my lap to keep them from shaking. The skin around my cuticles was still rough from years of industrial cleaning chemicals. Brandon used to love these hands. In his second year of med school, when he was weeping from stress, I used these low-skilled hands to massage the tension out of his shoulders. "These hands saved me, Grace," he used to say. Now, his lawyer was calling them worthless. Thorne continued pacing, owning the room. Mrs. Morrison, while pleasant enough, never pursued any meaningful career development. No college degree, no specialized skills, no significant assets of her own. He took a breath and delivered the killing blow. Therefore, my client requests a swift settlement. He is offering a modest rehabilitative alimony of $1,000 monthly for 2 years. We believe this is more than generous, considering she made no direct financial investment in Dr. Pierce's education or career advancement. No direct financial investment. I clenched my jaw so hard I felt a molar crack. I glanced at Brandon. He was nodding along, wearing that mask of the stoic, misunderstood genius. The man who once promised to take care of me was gone. In his place sat a stranger who viewed our marriage as a bad business merger he was trying to dissolve cheaply. Furthermore, Thorne added, waving a piece of paper, Dr. Pierce has generously offered to allow Mrs. Morrison to keep her personal belongings and her vehicle, a 2015 Honda Civic. He asked for nothing from her, as she has nothing of value to offer. He simply wishes to move forward. Silence hung heavy in the air. Nothing of value to offer. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene, because as those words echoed in the chamber, my mind didn't go to the pain. It went to the past. It went to 1973, Vietnam, long before I was born, to my Uncle Ray. While Ray was overseas fighting in the jungle, his own parents, my grandparents decided his room was too cluttered. They took his comic book collection, which he had been curating since 1957. First editions, Golden Age classics, books that today would be worth a fortune. They sold the entire lot to a junk dealer for $80. When Ray came home, he didn't scream about the money. He screamed about the betrayal. On his deathbed, he grabbed my wrist and gave me the only inheritance that mattered. "Grace," he wheezed, "listen to me. Blood doesn't mean loyalty. People change when the stakes get high. If you're gonna fund someone's future, you make them sign for it. A favor without a contract is just a gift. And nobody respects a gift horse. They just ride it until it drops." Uncle Ray's lesson was sitting in a leather bag at my feet, inside a sealed manila envelope. Brandon's lawyer sat down, looking pleased. He thought he'd crushed me. He thought he was dealing with a heartbroken waitress. My lawyer, Maggie, turned to me. She didn't look worried. She looked like a hunter who just heard the trap snap shut. "It's time," she whispered. Maggie stood up. Her voice cut through the room like a scalpel. "Your Honor," she said, steady and strong, "if I may present evidence that directly contradicts the narrative we just heard." Judge Henderson peered over her glasses, clearly tired of the standard divorce drama. "Proceed." I reached down into my bag. The envelope felt heavy. It contained 6 years of my lost youth, my sweat, and Uncle Ray's vengeance. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but my resolve was iron. I walked toward the bench. I could feel Brandon's eyes boring into my back. He was probably confused. What is she doing? Is she handing over grocery receipts? What he didn't know was that I wasn't just his wife. I was his angel investor. And the term sheet was about to expire. I extended the envelope to Judge Henderson. "What is this?" the judge asked. "This," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "is proof that the woman who supposedly has nothing of value to offer actually owns the most valuable asset in this room." The courtroom went dead silent. Judge Henderson broke the seal and slid the documents out. The sound of paper rustling in a silent courtroom is deafening. It sounds less like stationery and more like a dry, throat-swallowing fear. Judge Henderson pulled the stack of documents from the envelope. There were 3 copies. Thick, bonded paper. Blue ink signatures. Notarized stamps that gleamed like gold in the sterile light. She began to read. At first, her expression was purely judicial, a mask of practiced neutrality. She scanned the header, checked the dates, and verified the signatures. But as her eyes moved down to the first clause, her eyebrows twitched. She flipped the page. Her eyes widened slightly. She looked up at Brandon, then back down at the document, as if checking to see if she was hallucinating. Brandon shifted in his seat. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering, "What is it? What did she give her?" Thorne didn't answer. He was staring at the judge, his shark-like grin dissolving into the flat line of a predator sensing a bigger beast in the water. Judge Henderson flipped to the final page. She read the addendum, and then the impossible happened. She started to laugh. It wasn't a polite, judicial chuckle. It was a dry, incredulous bark of laughter that echoed off the mahogany paneling. She covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking, trying to regain her composure. It was the laugh of someone who had just heard the punchline to the world's darkest joke. "Your Honor." Thorne stood up, his voice uncertain for the first time. "May I ask what is so amusing?" Judge Henderson wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. The humor vanished from her face instantly, replaced by a look of cold, terrifying admiration. She looked directly at Brandon. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice sharp as a razor. "A moment ago, your counsel described your wife as unskilled and possessing no financial acumen. He stated she made no direct investment in your career." Brandon nodded slowly, confused. "Yes, Your Honor, that's true." "Well," the judge held up the document. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have never seen a rebuttal quite this absolute." She turned to the bailiff. "Please pass a copy to the plaintiff's counsel." Thorne snatched the papers from the bailiff. Brandon leaned over his shoulder to read. I watched the color drain from Brandon's face. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow fade, like a tide going out, leaving him pale and gray. "What is this?" Brandon whispered, his voice cracking. I don't remember this." "Allow me to refresh your memory," I said softly from my table. "October 14th, 2018. The night you almost quit. The night you needed $40,000 for tuition and living expenses, or you were going to be kicked out of the program." "That was a loan." Brandon snapped, looking at me with wild eyes. "You said you were helping me." "Read the title of the document, Mr. Thorne," Judge Henderson commanded. Thorne was trembling. He looked like he was holding a live grenade. He read aloud, his voice weak. "The Pierce Human Capital and AMP Education Investment Agreement." "Keep reading," the judge ordered. "Clause 4, Section B." Thorne swallowed hard. "The funds provided by the investor, Mrs. Grace Morrison, are not a loan, but a venture capital investment in the future earnings of the recipient, Dr. Brandon Pierce. In exchange for full financial support during the risk period of medical school and residency, the investors granted a 40% equity stake in the recipient's lifetime gross earnings derived from any medical practice, consulting, or related fields." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Veronica Ashford, sitting in the back, stopped checking her phone. Her mouth hung open. 40%, Judge Henderson repeated, savoring the number. "But wait, there's a bad lever clause, isn't there? Clause 9. Thorne looked like he was going to be sick. He read the fine print. "In the event that the recipient seeks to dissolve the partnership, marriage, due to no fault of the investor, or engages in infidelity, the equity stake shall increase to 60%, retroactive to the date of graduation." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. 60%, the judge said calmly. "Gross, before taxes." Brandon stood up, knocking his chair over. "This is insane. I didn't read it. She just told me to sign it, so the bank wouldn't hassle us. I didn't know. Ignorantia juris non excusat," Judge Henderson said coldly. "Ignorance is no excuse, doctor. You are an educated man. You signed a notarized contract. You took the money. You spent the money. And now, the bill is due." She looked at me. For a second, just a second, I saw a flicker of respect in her eyes. "Mrs. Morrison," the judge said, "your husband claimed you have nothing of value to offer. But according to this valid contract, you don't need to offer anything, because technically speaking, you own him." I looked at Brandon. He wasn't the arrogant surgeon anymore. He was just a bad investment I was about to liquidate. "I don't want a Honda Civic, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "I want my dividends." The air in the courtroom had changed. 10 minutes ago, it felt like a funeral for my future. Now, it felt like a demolition site, and Brandon was standing directly under the wrecking ball. Brandon slumped back into his chair. His expensive suit suddenly looked too big for him, as if he had physically shrunk under the weight of the percentage. 60%. It wasn't just a number, it was a life sentence. "This can't be legal," Brandon stammered, his voice thin and desperate. He turned to Marcus Thorne, grabbing his lawyer's arm. "Marcus, fix this. Tell her it's unconscionable. Tell her I was under duress." Thorne pulled his arm away. The shark had lost his teeth. He looked at the document, then at Judge Henderson, and finally Emmy. He was a professional. He knew when a checkmate had been played. "Dr. Pierce," Thorne said quietly, but loud enough for the room to hear, "you signed it before a notary. You reaffirmed it annually for tax purposes to claim the tuition credits. There is no duress. If we fight this, she will audit every penny you've hidden. And given the bad faith clause, we will lose more than money." Brandon looked at me. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking past me or through me. He was seeing me. "Grace," he said. His voice shifted. He dropped the arrogance and tried to put on the mask of the charming, vulnerable boy I had fallen in love with 8 years ago. "Grace, honey, look at us. We don't need courts. We don't need contracts. We're family. We can work this out. Just rescind the document. Please, for the sake of what we had. I looked at him. I waited for my heart to ache. I waited for that old instinct, the need to save him, to fix him, to sacrifice myself for him, to kick in. But I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger in a photograph. The man I loved died the moment he decided I was low-skilled and disposable. The Grace who would have saved you is gone, Brandon, I said softly. You divorced her. You claimed she had no value. You can't ask for a discount from stranger. From the back of the room, there was a sharp, distinct sound. The click of high heels against the hardwood floor. But they weren't coming closer. They were retreating. I turned just in time to see the heavy oak doors swing shut. Veronica Ashford was gone. She hadn't even stayed to say goodbye. She was a woman who understood ROI, return on investment. And Dr. Brandon Pierce had just become a toxic asset. Brandon watched the door close, and his face crumbled. The humiliation was complete. Judge Henderson cleared her throat, bringing the room back to order. Counselor Thorne, she said, do you wish to request a recess to discuss a settlement? Or shall I enter a judgment based on the contract standing before me? Thorne sighed, defeated. We request a recess, Your Honor, to discuss payment terms. Granted, the judge said. She gathered her papers, but before she stood up, she leaned forward and looked at me. Mrs. Morrison, or should I say, Miss Morrison? Ms. Morrison is fine, Your Honor. Ms. Morrison, she nodded, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. My father was a Vietnam veteran. He lost a lot when he came home, too. He always told me that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one yelling. It's the one taking notes. She banged her gavel. Court is in recess. Walking out of the courthouse an hour later felt different than walking in. The sun was the same. The city noise was the same, but the gravity was different. I felt lighter. Maggie, my lawyer, walked beside me, packing the signed settlement agreement into her briefcase. We didn't get the full 60%. We settled for a lump sum of the current equity in the house, his retirement accounts, and a binding agreement for 35% of his income for the next 15 years. It was enough. It was more than enough. You okay, Grace? Maggie asked, putting a hand on my shoulder. I took a deep breath of the city air. It smelled like exhaust and rain, but to me, it smelled like freedom. I am, I said, and I meant it. I walked to the parking lot. My 2015 Honda Civic was sitting there, dented bumper and all. The car Brandon had generously allowed me to keep because I had nothing of value. I unlocked the door and sat in the driver's seat. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up the leather bag. I pulled out the manila envelope, now empty of the contract, and reached deeper inside. My fingers brushed against old, crinkled plastic. I pulled out a comic book, Action Comics, from the late 30s. It was tattered, faded, and practically worthless to a collector because of the condition. It was the only one Uncle Ray had managed to save from the junk pile all those years ago. He had given it to me before he died, not for its money, but for its memory. I ran my thumb over the cover. We did it, Uncle Ray, I whispered to the empty car. We got the equity back. I put the car in gear. I didn't know exactly where I was going next. Maybe back to school. Maybe to start a business. Maybe just a quiet coffee shop to sit in silence. A silence that belonged to me, paid for in full. Brandon had his millions, or what was left of them. He had his career, but he would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, checking the fine print, wondering who else was underestimating him. I have my scars, but for the first time in a long time, they didn't hurt. They just felt like proof of life. I turned up the radio and drove away. Some investments take years to mature. Grace waited 6 years for her return, not in interest, but in justice. Brandon thought he was the architect of his own success, but he forgot the golden rule of business. Never underestimate the silent partner. What about you? If you were in Grace's shoes, would you have settled for the money? Or would you have taken the 60% and watched his world burn, even if it took years in court? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of cold, calculated payback, Make sure to like this video and subscribe to Heirloom Scars. Turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow we have a story about a father who thought he could buy his children's love, only to find out the price tag was higher than his life insurance. Money changes blood. Justice leaves scars. I'll see you in the next one.